Whether or not you're superstitious or even a little stitious, this is a fun story. I think especially because of the way it ends. So today I'm going to be rambling about the curse of Billy Penn that had just a chokehold on Philadelphia sports for 21 years. And also, to switch things up, I'm going to be tapping on this tennis racket today. See what kind of noises, what kind of sounds we can make with this thing. In practice, when I picked it up, it was maybe a little bit easier without the microphone in front, but let me know what you think anyway in the comments. So, William Penn, he was the so-called founder of Pennsylvania, and so as you can imagine, there is a statue of him on top of Philadelphia City Hall. Now, City Hall was built in 1901, and there was always this sort of unspoken rule that no building in Philadelphia would be taller than City Hall. I think the idea was that, there's something about William Penn's hat. Nothing was going to be as tall as William Penn's hat on City Hall. And apparently there was this gentleman's agreement that said that the Philadelphia Art Commission would not approve any building in the city that was taller than the statue of William Penn. Now, let's set aside old Billy Penn for a second to talk about sports in Philadelphia. So, historically, in the 70s and 80s, sports teams in Philadelphia had some decent success. The Phillies won the 1980 World Series and the 1983 National League pennant. Was that loud? The Flyers over in the NHL, they won back-to-back Stanley Cups in 74 and 75, and then they made the Stanley Cup Finals 4 years in a row: 76, 1980, 85, and 87. I didn't say 4 years in a row, did I? If I said 4 years in a row, that's not what I meant. I just told you which years. And then the Eagles played in Super Bowl 15 at the end of the 1980 season. And the 76ers made the NBA Finals in 77, 1980, and 82, and and then they swept the 1983 finals. And actually, we can also consider the Villanova Wildcats, who won the 1985 NCAA Div 1 men's basketball title. And what was a huge upset, by the way. We might have to make a video about this during March Madness. But all this to say, from the mid-70s to the late-ish 80s, Philadelphia teams were doing great. Just like general success across the board. So what could go wrong? Well, Willard Goldsmith Rouse III. What a name, honestly. He announced that he had plans to build 2 towers in the city center that would be taller than City Hall. And there were mixed feelings at the time, but it seems that the majority of locals opposed building up and breaking that height ceiling. They were basically afraid that it would be the beginning of Philadelphia turning into a metropolis of skyscrapers. And it would sort of ruin the charm of Philadelphia as they saw it. So a city planning commission met to decide whether they would officially approve buildings that broke that unwritten height limit that would be taller than the statue of William Penn on City Hall. And they came to the conclusion that the 2 towers in question would create 12,000 jobs in the city and $15 million in tax revenue. The mayor of Philadelphia, Wilson Good, he came out in favor of the project of Rouse's buildings. And he proposed to have sort of like a special area in the city, sort of like a few blocks, that would allow buildings to go higher than City Hall. But the commission still decided to prevent buildings at that meeting, prevent buildings taller than City Hall, while the commission studied the issue for 1 year. But you can guess where this is going. Almost a year to the day that that meeting happened, on May 13th, 1985, One Liberty Place, the first tower, broke ground 3 blocks away from City Hall. And construction was completed 2 years later, in 1987. Now, coincidentally, things started going downhill for Philadelphia's sports franchises in 1987. Just 2 months after One Liberty Place opened, the Flyers lost the Stanley Cup Finals to Edmonton. It's worth noting, too, that they just collapsed in the 1997 Stanley Cup Finals. They were swept by the Red Wings. The Phillies lost the 1993 World Series to the Blue Jays. That series ended with that Joe Carter walk-off 3-run homer. And I think the World Series has only ever been won twice on a walk-off home run. The other time would have been 1960, the Pittsburgh Pirates. The 76ers, on their end, they lost the 2001 NBA Finals to the Lakers. And the Eagles lost 3 straight NFC championship games from 2001 to 2003. Then they reached Super Bowl 39 in the 2004 season, and they lost to the Patriots by only 3 points. Also, since the opening of One Liberty Place, Philadelphia teams lost 10 times in semifinal rounds. So 5 of those semifinals were eliminations for the Flyers. So 89, 95, 2000, 04, and 08. And actually, in the year 2000 conference final, the Flyers were up 3-1, and then they lost 3 straight. And then the Eagles, they lost the NFC Championship games. I think I mentioned this 3 times in a row, from the 01 to the 03 seasons, and it was the first time in NFL history that a team had lost back-to-back conference title games at home since the NFL started awarding home field advantage based on regular season records. So Philadelphia just setting all the wrong records since One Liberty Place went up. And then let's not forget the fans. During this time, Philadelphia fans, they sort of became infamous for their behavior. It's, ebbs and flows with Philadelphia fans, but this was definitely a bad time in their history. There was the Bounty game, or the Bounty Bowl, where fans just threw ice and beer at broadcasters. In 1997, an Eagles fan shot a flare, a flare gun into the stands. And it was all sort of blamed on the poor run of form for Philadelphia teams. And so over all this time, it sort of became a common saying, like a common thought, that Philadelphia's sports teams would not win a championship as long as a building rises above Billy Penn. So something needs to be done. So, in 2007, the Comcast Center is being built in Philadelphia, and it is set to become the new tallest building in the city. Now, there's a tradition in, I guess, building construction known as topping off or topping out a building, and basically it involves raising the final beam with an American flag and a small evergreen tree. So, iron workers, in an attempt to lift the curse, they attached a small figurine of William Penn to the beam, along with the flag and the tree. The CEO of the company that built the Comcast Center, he told the Philadelphia Inquirer, "We don't believe in the myth, but to be safe, we've added the statue of Billy Penn." So it's kind of like a sporty Pascal's wager. Well, the very next year, on October 29th, 2008, the Philadelphia Phillies win the World Series in 5 games. The curse of Billy Penn has been lifted, and this was the first Major League professional sports title for the city of Philadelphia since 1983. Now, as you might have guessed, a building from 2007 was never gonna remain the tallest building in Philadelphia. So on November 27th, 2017, the new tallest building in Philadelphia, the Comcast Technology Center, was topped out. And once again, iron workers placed a new William Penn figurine on top of the beam. And just over 2 months later, February 4th, 2018, the Philadelphia Eagles defeated the New England Patriots in Super Bowl 52. They win their first Super Bowl in team history. Also worth mentioning, in 2020, the Philadelphia Union won the MLS Supporters Shield, which basically means they topped out the table in the regular season. And in 2022, they went to the MLS Cup final for the first time. Ultimately, though, they lost to LAFC on penalties. And that is how the curse of Billy Penn came and went in Philadelphia. Now, my opinion on this, let me set this down. Time for some real talk. championship droughts happen all the time and for much longer periods, even for cities who have had success in the past. I mean, just look at Minneapolis, right? Minneapolis has a team in each of the big four. You've got the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Minnesota Twins, the Minnesota Vikings, and the Minnesota Wild. Their most recent championship was the Minnesota Twins winning the World Series in 1991. So over 32 years, they have gone a total of 115 seasons without a championship. New York City, great example, obviously, very decorated city. They have 8 teams in the Big Four, 2 more teams. I guess the Red Bulls are New York City, but we'll call it 2 more teams in the MLS. And they haven't won a Big Four championship since 2011, which, believe it or not, is now 13 years ago. And I think it's funny how we look at, when we think about curses like Billy Penn, when we look at results from a team differently, right? Because we'll consider the fact that Philadelphia franchises made it to the semifinals or the finals during their good years as a success. They were the second best team that year. But then when we think about the curse, all of a sudden we're saying, oh, they got to the finals, but they couldn't win. So it's like the exact same result is looked in 2 completely different ways. That being said, superstitions do play a huge part in professional sports, if anything, just psychologically, even if it's all coincidence. And from a sports history point of view, I think it's super interesting to talk about and include in the stories we tell, because it's all part of the culture, really. And especially with something like the curse of Billy Penn, where the timing just worked out beautifully. It gave us a fun story to think about and talk about. So while the Phillies would have won that World Series anyway, isn't it much more fun to think about, to think that William Penn was in some afterlife and just needed his ego appeased a little bit before he let his city and his, well, I shouldn't say his state, but his city win a championship. And I'll leave it at that. Please let me know in the comments what you think of this type of story. I was torn between talking today about Billy Penn or the Socceroos curse, the Australian football or soccer national team. So if you liked this video, I'll be sure to cover more curses and superstitions in future videos. Otherwise, thank you so much for hanging out with me. I'll see you in the next video.